My name is Jack Miller, and this story isn't about money or fame. It's about something far more powerful. It's the tale of a man with no house and a dog with no name, two forgotten souls who met on the streets of Denver when both of them had nothing left, and how that meeting stitched together the beginning of a bond that neither of them expected. It was late autumn in Denver, the kind of day when the sky hangs low and gray, and the air cuts sharp against your skin no matter how many layers you wear. The sidewalks were cracked, littered with curled brown leaves that skittered in the wind like little ghosts. Cars rolled past, their tires hissing on the damp pavement, horns blaring in the distance. But for Frank, the noise of the city had long since faded into background static. He was an old Marine veteran who had once stood proud in uniform, now reduced to rags and a beard white as snow. His hands were rough, his boots worn thin at the soles, every step a reminder of years spent surviving rather than living. Hunger gnawed at him like a rat in his belly, sharp, constant, a cruel reminder that he was still alive when sometimes he wished he wasn't. That afternoon he stood by a trash can, digging with the patience of someone who has learned to expect nothing. His fingers brushed against an empty soda can, sticky wrappers, and then nothing. He sighed, about to move on, when thud a paper bag landed near his feet. He blinked. Steam rose from the top, curling into the chilly air. He knelt down and caught a whiff hamburger, fries, the kind of greasy perfume that could make a starving man believe in miracles again. Frank looked up, scanning the street. A black car pulled away from the curb, but no one called out, no one came running back. It was just there, sitting warm and waiting, like heaven had dropped him a gift. His heart jumped. Maybe God was still watching after all. Maybe mercy hadn't forgotten him. He muttered under his breath, "Well now, did the heavens just send me dinner?" His hand stretched for the bag, but before his fingers could close around it, a sound froze him in place, a low, guttural growl. From behind the trash can stepped a dog, if you could even call it that. Its fur was matted and filthy, patches missing, ribs visible beneath the skin. Its eyes were sharp, wild, and its teeth glinted like broken glass. This wasn't a family pet waiting for a treat. This was a fighter, a survivor, just like Frank. And right then both man and dog understood. This was not a gift. This was a battle. Frank lunged for the bag. The dog was quicker. They wrestled, man and mutt, tugging like two kids over the last toy at Christmas. Fries scattered across the sidewalk, sauce smeared up Frank's sleeve. The dog tore free a chunk of burger while Frank caught another piece mid-air. The ridiculousness of it all might have been funny if it wasn't so tragic. Then, like lightning, a woman in a red coat stormed up. "Hey, that's my lunch," she shouted, glaring at the ragged old man and the filthy dog locked in combat over her food. Frank froze, shame rushing to his cheeks. I thought someone forgot it," he stammered. She snatched the bag back, muttering angrily. Frank sighed, shoulders slumping, and handed over the scraps he had clung to. The dog stood there, lip curled in what almost looked like a smug grin, then trotted off into the gray afternoon as if he had won. Frank shook his head and grumbled, "Stupid mutt," but his eyes followed the animal as it disappeared down the block. And somewhere in the back of his tired mind, something stirred, something stubborn and foolish. He scratched his beard and muttered, "All right, buddy. I don't know who you are, but if you keep hanging around me, I guess I'll have to call you something. And right now, looks like I just found myself a new buddy." That night the rain came hard, pounding against the city, running down the tunnel where Frank huddled with only a torn blanket. The wind knifed through the cracks, stabbing cold into his bones. His stomach growled again, and he cursed the lost sandwich. Burger, fries, soda, and that damn dog, he muttered, hugging himself against the chill. Then came that sound again, the steady click of paws on wet concrete. Frank flinched and looked up. At the far end of the tunnel stood the same dog, soaked to the skin, trembling, eyes glowing faint in the dark. Frank's voice was a grumble. "What do you want now? Thought you already won." The dog stepped forward slowly and dropped a plastic bag at Frank's feet. Inside was half of a squished sandwich, soggy and misshapen, probably scavenged from another trash can. Frank stared, silent. The dog wagged his tail once. No growl, no challenge, just an offering. Frank let out a long sigh, weary but touched. He picked up the sandwich, bit into it, and chuckled. Still better than dry ramen. Then he slid half of it back toward the dog. "Here, share it." even if you cheated me this morning. The dog. Buddy ate slowly, carefully, then curled up beside him. Outside, the storm hammered the city, but in that forgotten tunnel, two broken lives leaned into each other like scraps of cloth stitched together, finding warmth where the world had given them none. That was the night they stopped being strangers, and though neither of them said it, both man and dog had found something worth holding on to. And by the time the first light of morning pushed through the gray clouds, they were already more than survivors. They were friends. And that, my friends, is where part 2 begins. Morning crept into the city slowly, the streets still damp from the storm, the tunnel heavy with the smell of wet concrete. Frank stirred awake, shivering beneath his ragged blanket, only to find something unexpected pressing against his chest. He blinked, and there it was, a bundle of soaked fur, warm and steady, breathing with the rhythm of sleep. Buddy had curled himself right up against him, one paw laid across Frank's chest, like a child who had finally found someone safe enough to hold on to. The sound of his soft snoring filled the empty space of the tunnel, turning it, for a brief moment, into something that almost felt like home. Frank wrinkled his nose and muttered under his breath, half annoyed, half amused. "Hey now, you think I'm your personal pillow?" Buddy groaned in his sleep, tongue lolling out of his mouth, looking ridiculously comfortable as if the cold ground had turned into a feather bed. Frank shook his head. "If I'd known you snored like that, I'd have left you out in the rain," he whispered. Buddy stretched, yawned, then in perfect disregard for human manners, lifted his leg and relieved himself just a few feet away. Frank's eyes went wide. "Really? This is the living room, pal. What do you think this is? Central Park?" Buddy wagged his tail lazily, his face saying as clearly as any words, "I'm a dog, old man." "What did you expect?" Frank grumbled, but the corners of his mouth betrayed him, curving into a reluctant smile. Later that day, Frank carried his old cardboard sign to his usual street corner. But this time, something was different. This time, Buddy trotted proudly at his side. The sign now read, "Unemployed vet, please help me and my dog." For the first time, Frank had written those last 3 words, and for the first time in a long while, people noticed. Buddy sat down beside him, perfectly still. His ears drooped, his eyes softened, wide and sad like a hero straight out of an old Disney movie. Strangers walking past slowed without even realizing it. A businessman glanced back, a teenager stopped to look, and then a young woman came closer. She knelt down right in front of Buddy, her hand hovering uncertainly before finally stroking his dirty fur. "Oh, you poor thing," she whispered, her voice trembling with sympathy. At that very moment, Buddy tilted his head just slightly, gave the faintest whimper, and let out a sigh so deep it seemed to carry years of loneliness. The sound hit the young woman straight in the chest. Her eyes glistened. She reached into her bag, pulled out 2 sandwiches and a cold drink, and set them down gently in front of Frank. Buddy leaned into her touch, closing his eyes like a child starved for kindness, then opened them again with just enough shimmer to look as if tears might spill. He licked her hand softly, then gave one small wag of his tail, enough to show gratitude without losing that sad, soulful expression. Frank watched, stunned, as coins and bills began to land in his cup. The girl smiled at Buddy, her face tender, before finally walking away. Buddy turned his head slowly, looked at Frank, and in that look was all the mischief and brilliance of a born performer. "See, I told you. I'm useful." As the afternoon stretched on, Frank realized something he hadn't felt in years. People weren't brushing past him the way they used to. They weren't looking away as though he were just another shadow on the street. No, today their eyes lingered, not on him exactly, but on the dog at his side. Through Buddy, they saw him. For the first time in a long time, Frank wasn't invisible. Every so often someone would stop, kneel, and murmur a kind word as they scratched Buddy's ears. A few coins clinked into the cup, a sandwich landed in his lap, a soda bottle rolled to his feet. Frank chewed slowly, his stomach grateful, his heart even more so. He muttered, "Well, pal, looks like you're not just company, you're a meal ticket." Buddy tilted his head, as if pretending not to understand, then gave the faintest smirk of a tail wag. By evening, the air grew colder. the kind of chill that bites through fabric and skin until it reaches your bones. Frank fought with a rusty can of sardines, his fingers stiff, his stomach growling. Buddy sat close, watching with unblinking eyes. Frank sighed. "Don't even start. I'm hungry enough to bite the can myself." But Buddy didn't beg. He didn't whimper. Instead, his gaze shifted across the street. On a bench sat a man eating lunch, the paper wrapping crinkling in his hands. Buddy lowered his ears, got up slowly, and padded over. He sat directly in front of the man, silent, still. Then came the act. His eyes widened, shimmering, his head tilted slightly to one side, and then perfect timing he gave a deep, mournful sigh that could have belonged to a heartbroken poet. The man froze, sandwich halfway to his mouth. He stared, then broke it in half. "Here you go, Buddy. You've earned it." He held out the piece. Buddy accepted with delicate grace, chewing as though savoring every crumb of kindness. Then he glanced back at Frank, eyes sparkling with triumph. Frank's jaw dropped. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Didn't even bark, didn't even wag, just sighed. He shook his head, half exasperated, half in awe. "Took me years to perfect my sad puppy face, and you nail it in one afternoon." That night, the tunnel felt different. The same cracked walls, the same dripping water, the same worn blanket, yet somehow it wasn't so cold anymore. Frank and Buddy sat side by side, sharing a bag of chips some college kid had tossed them. Frank chuckled softly. "You know, I used to be a Marine. Strong, proud, uniform pressed sharp. And now here I am, begging for fries with a dog who could outact half of Hollywood." Buddy rested his head on Frank's knee, his eyes half closed, breathing slow and steady. Frank's hand hovered for a moment before finally settling on the dog's tangled fur. His voice softened. "Thanks for coming back, Buddy. I thought I was used to being alone. But with you here, everything feels less empty." Buddy snored lightly, the sound gentle, steady, and for Frank it was the sweetest sound he had heard in years. He leaned back, closing his eyes, a smile tugging at his lips. Because tonight, he wasn't alone. He had a partner. He had a friend. And tomorrow, well, tomorrow they were going to put on a show. Morning laid a pale mist over the park, softening every edge, turning footsteps into whispers and benches into gray silhouettes. Frank sat with Buddy on an old wooden bench across from the charity food line, the kind where patience looks like hope if you squint hard enough. He cupped his hands to warm them and said, half joking, half desperate, "We need something big today, pal. Something that makes them stop and feel." Buddy tilted his head, the universal sign for, "I'm listening, but I make no promises." Frank grinned and pulled a pair of scuffed sunglasses from his pocket. "Plan B," he said. "I'm blind, you limp. We share the loot. 50-50. Buddy's tail flicked once, not quite approval, not quite protest, more like I'll allow it if the director's good. They rehearsed on the path like two vaudeville washouts. Frank tapped the ground with a cane he'd found in a thrift bin, counting under his breath, step, tap, step, pause. Buddy matched him, dragging a paw just enough to break a heart, but not enough to cause real pain. Frank whispered cues like a stage manager who'd once worn a uniform. Head low, ears down, little breath, now the sigh. Buddy delivered, with timing that would make a seasoned actor jealous. Soon they entered the line. Not to the front, Frank still had pride, but close enough to be seen. Sunglasses on, shoulders hunched, cane ticking on the concrete, he was a picture of weary dignity. Beside him, Buddy limped with artful restraint, tongue barely out, eyes glistening with that soft, wounded sheen he seemed to summon from nowhere. Conversations thinned, faces turned. A man with paint under his nails whispered, "Poor guy." And a woman with a floral scarf pressed a sandwich into Frank's hands, saying, "Bless you." Coins clinked into the paper cup. A teenager in a varsity jacket squatted, palm open, asking Buddy if he wanted a fry. Buddy took it daintily, then looked back at Frank like a partner who hits his mark every time. For a while, the world felt gentler. Strangers offered food, a paper coffee, a grocery bag with a can of soup and a note that simply said, "You matter." Frank felt the old ache in his chest loosen, yet a new ache crept in the ache of bending truth to stay alive. He swallowed it. Hunger has a way of winning arguments. He squeezed Buddy's ear and muttered, "You're a pro, kid. I should list you as executive producer." They made it past the worst of the line and lingered near the exit where kindness tends to gather, a quiet eddy of warm hands and soft voices. Buddy settled onto his belly and let out the gentlest whimper, just enough to pull the last hesitant heart into their orbit. A little girl with sparkly shoes cupped Buddy's face and said, "You're brave." Her father nodded at Frank with a respect that Frank hadn't felt in years, and then a voice cut through the mist like a blade. "Hey, old man, I saw you running yesterday." The air snapped. A tall security guard strode forward, finger raised, jaw tight. Eyes swung from Buddy to Frank and back again. The man's voice boomed, "Faking a disability for handouts is fraud." The word hung there, heavy as a chain. A few faces hardened, a few hands pulled back. Frank felt the ground tilt, the small dignity he'd gathered trembling like a paper cup in the wind. He opened his mouth, but the right words wouldn't come. Buddy lifted his head, ears twitching, as if hearing a cue that only he could hear. The stage lights, such as they were, had just gone white hot. Frank's heart thudded in his ears. The guard's boots stopped inches away, the kind of stance that says this will go one way and not the other. "Stand up," the guard demanded. "Take off the glasses." Frank's fingers hovered at the frames. Pride pulled one way, hunger the other. He thought of the old days, straight spine, clear orders, a flag on his sleeve, and then of the last cold night, and the tunnel, and the way Buddy's snore had made the dark feel less cruel. Before Frank could choose, Buddy chose for him. A tiny whimper, softer than a leaf falling, and then the dog's body loosened, went slack, and folded to the ground. Legs stiffened, eyes rolled half back, tongue lolling with theatrical surrender. It was, to be frank, a flawless collapse. Gasps flared through the line like sparks. "Oh my God," the dog someone cried. "Call a vet," another voice shouted. The guard's face changed, less anger now, more alarm, and he took a step back with hands raised, as if afraid of being blamed for a broken heart more than a broken rule. Frank dropped to his knees so fast his bones protested. "Buddy," he choked, cradling the scruffy head. "Stay with me, kid. Breathe." His voice cracked on the last word. A woman pressed a water bottle into his hand. A man fumbled a phone. The little girl with sparkly shoes clung to her father's leg and whispered, "Is the brave dog dying?" Buddy's chest didn't move, until very secretly, it moved. A shallow, measured breath. A sliver of an eye, testing the room like an actor checking the house from behind the curtain. "Please," Frank begged, and truth and show swirled until even he couldn't tell where one ended. He felt hot behind the eyes. "He's all I've got." The circle around them thickened. The guard's radio squawked and then fell silent. "Sir," the guard said, "lower now. I didn't touch him." And then Buddy delivered the coup de theater, the tiniest tail twitch, a blink like the first star at dusk, and a hesitant sigh that said, "Well, all right. Perhaps I shall live to eat another sandwich." The crowd's tension broke like a wave. Laughter burst out, shaky with relief. "He's okay," someone laughed. "Drama king," someone else murmured, dabbing at their eyes anyway. The guard exhaled, rubbed his neck, and muttered, "Guess he fooled me too." Frank let out a laugh that was half sob. He kissed Buddy's forehead, dignity be damned, and whispered, "You little genius. You saved us both." Bills and coins slipped into the cup. A paper bag with noodles and bread appeared in his hands, and the line, having survived its matinee, drifted back to ordinary time. The guard cleared his throat and said, not unkindly, "Move along when you can." Frank nodded. The man hesitated, then added, "Take care of the dog." That night they ate on the stone steps of a quiet church, steam from the noodles fogging Frank's glasses. "To the finest actor I've ever met," he said, raising a plastic fork like a toast. Buddy squinted into the middle distance with an expression that could only be called modest and then punctured the scene with a robust, unapologetic fart. Frank nearly choked laughing. "And that, sir," he coughed, "is why you will never win an Oscar." Buddy thumped his tail and rested his head on Frank's knee, the way friends do when words have done enough work for one day. For a long moment the city hushed, as if granting them a pocket of mercy. Frank felt warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with soup. He scratched the spot behind Buddy's ear and said softly, "We did good, kid. Tomorrow, we'll try to be honest. But tonight, thank you." They sat like that until the street lights blurred, and if you think a day like this would be the last of their trials, you'd be wrong. Trouble, loud and sudden, was already revving up around a corner, the kind that roars on two wheels and doesn't bother to brake. That, my friends, is where part 4 begins. It was one of those afternoons when the city seemed tired, the weekend flea market winding down, the air smelling faintly of roasted peanuts and fried dough that clung to your clothes even after you'd left. Frank shuffled along the cracked sidewalk, counting the last few coins in his coat pocket. The metal was cold and light, just enough for a cup of coffee, not nearly enough for a bed. He sighed, his voice low. "If we don't get lucky tomorrow, Buddy, I might have to check into a shelter." Buddy trotted beside him, tongue out, tail wagging as if the world held nothing but sunshine. At Frank's words, Buddy tilted his head, ears perking with curiosity, the kind of look that said, "What's a shelter? Is it a park? Do they serve chicken there?" Frank chuckled, then swallowed hard, because the truth was something Buddy would never understand. Shelters were places with rules and strangers, sometimes warm but rarely kind, and often with a sign on the door that said, "No dogs allowed." The thought of leaving Buddy outside in the cold gnawed at Frank worse than hunger ever could. Before he could say more, an engine roared behind them, loud, violent, like thunder in a narrow alley. Tires screeched. A motorcycle swerved onto the sidewalk, then vanished around the corner with a scream of metal and smoke. Frank spun around just in time to see Buddy lying twisted on the pavement. For a second the world went silent, like all sound had been sucked away. Then he saw it. Blood seeping from Buddy's hind leg, fur torn away in patches, his body trembling, eyes fluttering, fighting to stay open. Buddy Frank's voice broke like glass. He dropped to his knees, hands shaking as he tried to steady the dog's body. "No, no, no. Don't close your eyes. You hear me? Don't you dare close your eyes." Buddy panted, each breath short and sharp, chest rising in shallow jerks. Frank looked around, frantic, waving his arms at the traffic. "Somebody, please, help me. My dog, he's been hit. He's dying." People passed, glancing, frowning, but no one stopped. A pickup swerved around him like he was a piece of trash in the road. His throat burned with rage. "Cowards," he shouted. His voice cracked. "He's not trash, he's my... But the words stuck in his chest, too big to push out. He sprinted across the street into a convenience store, slamming both hands on the counter. "Please, call someone. My dog's bleeding out. He needs help now." The young clerk stepped back, eyes wide. I don't know. I'm not a vet." Frank's voice rose, desperate. "I'm not either, but if no one does anything, he's going to die." He shoved away from the counter and bolted back into the street. Buddy was still there, trembling faintly, breaths coming thinner, weaker. Frank ripped off his old coat, folded it into a makeshift pillow, and slid it beneath Buddy's body to keep him off the hard ground. Blood seeped into the fabric, staining his hands, mixing with the scars already etched there from battles long past. Tears ran freely down his face, falling onto Buddy's fur. "You're not leaving me, you hear," he choked. "You still owe me 2 sandwiches, a bag of fries, and you farted on my blanket last night. You don't get to leave me with that as your last gift." His voice trembled, caught between anger and begging, his chest heaving with the helplessness of a man who had fought wars and lost, but never like this. Buddy's breath rattled thinly, like the last gasp of winter wind. Frank bent low, pressing his forehead to the dog's, whispering, "Stay with me, kid. Please, stay." And just when his own hope began to flicker, he heard its screeching brakes, the slam of a van door. With a squeal of brakes, a silver van skidded to a halt by the curb. Painted on the side in bold blue letters were the words, "Mobile Veterinary Clinic." Frank blinked through his tears, hardly believing what he was seeing. A woman in a white coat leapt out, a stretcher in her hands, her voice calm but firm. "Where's the patient?" Frank staggered to his feet, waving her over. "Here, please, he's slipping away." The vet knelt, eyes sharp and steady, and together they lifted Buddy's limp body onto the stretcher. Buddy's eyes fluttered open just enough to find Frank's face, and Frank whispered, "I'm right here, kid. Not leaving you." The dog's eyelids dropped again as if that was all he needed to hear. Inside the van, everything smelled of antiseptic and rubber. Machines beeped quietly, lights flickered above. Frank sat on a cracked plastic chair, his fists clenched tight, as the vet worked with practiced speed. She wrapped Buddy's leg in clean gauze, inserted an IV, checked his breathing. Frank watched every move like a soldier back in combat, counting each breath, praying each one wasn't the last. His mind spun memories of past battles, the men he had lost, the feeling of holding someone slipping away. But this time it wasn't a fellow Marine. This time it was a dog with muddy fur and the biggest heart he had ever known. Minutes dragged like hours. Finally the vet exhaled, removed her gloves, and turned to him. "He's lucky. Just a fracture and some blood loss. If you had come 10 minutes later..." Her voice trailed off, but the meaning landed heavy. Frank's shoulders sagged, relief and exhaustion pouring through him like water after a drought. He wiped at his face, then whispered over and over, "Thank you. Thank you." The vet tilted her head gently. "Is he yours?" The question was simple, but it hit Frank harder than any punch he had taken in the ring of life. He opened his mouth, shut it again, shook his head, then nodded, then shook it once more. His voice broke as he finally said, "No, he's not my dog." He paused, looked at Buddy lying still but breathing, and then added, "He's my friend." The vet gave a small smile, the kind that understands more than words can say. She patted Frank's arm. "Well, your friend's going to be just fine. He's tough, and he's got someone who cares." Frank let out a weak laugh, rubbing his face with both hands. "Cares, lady? I just yelled at a convenience store clerk like a lunatic. If that ain't caring, I don't know what is." The vet chuckled softly and stood, checking the monitors once more. Frank leaned close to Buddy, whispering into his ear, "Hear that, kid? You're not allowed to leave yet. You're stuck with me." Buddy's tail gave the faintest thump against the stretcher, a tired little drumbeat of agreement. Frank sat back, hand resting on Buddy's paw, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something he thought he had lost forever: hope. The rain had washed the city clean by the next morning, leaving the streets shining silver under a heavy gray sky. Frank stepped carefully off the city bus, Buddy leaning against his leg like a tired old soldier. His hind leg was wrapped in fresh bandages, poking out from a small dog raincoat the vet had insisted he wear. Every step was stiff, cautious, but Buddy's eyes were brighter than they'd been in weeks. He wasn't beaten. If anything, he looked proud, as if he'd just walked out of a war with a medal pinned to his chest. Frank steadied him with one hand. "I know you hate walking slow, pal, but today that's all we need. No tricks, no scams, just one step at a time." Buddy snorted, as if to say, "Deal." They walked down a narrow road lined with dripping trees, puddles splashing under Frank's boots and Buddy's paws. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Not that dogs and men need to. The silence was enough. Frank found himself thinking for the first time in years about what it meant to have a home. Not a roof or four walls, but someone waiting, someone walking beside you even when you're limping. He smiled, a small private smile, and squeezed Buddy's ear. "Feels like we're heading home, huh?" But then a cry shattered the quiet. High-pitched, desperate, tearing through the wet air like glass breaking. "Help somebody, please." Frank froze, his stomach twisting. Buddy's ears shot up. Another scream followed, louder, panicked, the voice of a young girl. Without hesitation, Frank shoved into the brush, branches scratching his face, mud sucking at his boots. "Come on, Buddy," he shouted. Buddy limped after him, ignoring the pain in his bandaged leg. They broke into a clearing, and the scene before them made Frank's blood boil. A man in his 40s had a teenage girl pinned to the ground. Her clothes were torn, her arms flailing weakly, his sleeve pressed hard across her mouth. Her eyes were wide with terror. Frank's voice thundered, "Hey, get off her, you sick bastard!" The man spun around, a knife flashing in his hand. His face twisted with rage. "Back off, old man. This ain't your business." Frank's hands trembled, but his eyes blazed with fire. "It is now." He stepped forward, chest heaving. Beside him, Buddy growled low, the sound deep and dangerous. Even with 3 good legs, he crouched, teeth bared, eyes locked on the attacker. The man faltered just for a second. Frank whispered, "Buddy, you got 1 bite left in you." Buddy didn't hesitate. With a sudden burst of speed, he launched himself forward, jaws clamping down on the man's arm. The knife flew from his hand, clattering into the mud. Frank surged in, fist slamming into the man's jaw with all the weight of years of hunger, pain, and survival. They tumbled into the mud, grappling, Frank's old muscles burning with rage-fueled strength. The girl scrambled free, running to Buddy, clinging to his muddy fur. Buddy stood over her, snarling, a guard dog forged in fire. And in that moment, Frank realized they weren't just 2 survivors anymore. They were protectors. The struggle in the mud was quick and brutal. Frank wasn't young anymore. His knees screamed, his back burned, but years of surviving on the streets had kept a fire in his bones. Rage lent him strength. He pinned the man's arm down with his knee while Buddy held tight to the other, his teeth locked like iron. The attacker writhed and cursed, but when Buddy gave a low, guttural growl inches from his face, the fight drained out of him. Moments later, the sound of sirens sliced through the trees. Blue and red lights flashed against the wet branches as 3 squad cars skidded to a halt nearby. Officers stormed into the clearing, weapons raised, shouts cutting through the chaos. "Hands where we can see them." The man tried to squirm free, but Frank slammed him down again with the last of his strength. 2 officers cuffed him, hauling him to his feet. His curses faded as they dragged him away. Meanwhile, a medic wrapped a blanket around the sobbing girl. She clung to Buddy, burying her face in his muddy fur, whispering over and over, "Thank you, thank you." Between sobs, she told the officers, "That man and his dog, they saved me. If they hadn't come..." Her voice cracked, but no one needed her to finish the sentence. The truth was written in every tear. Frank staggered back, collapsing onto a tree stump, gasping for breath. Mud streaked his face, sweat stung his eyes, but he managed a crooked smile when Buddy limped over and pressed against his leg. "You did good, kid," Frank rasped, his voice shaking with pride. "Real good." Buddy's tail thumped weakly, his eyes bright even through exhaustion. One officer knelt in front of Frank. "You all right, sir?" Frank let out a hoarse laugh. "Tired, starving, covered in mud. But yeah, worth it." The officer nodded with a smile that carried respect. "You and your dog, you're heroes today." Heroes. The word felt foreign in Frank's ears. Once, long ago, he'd worn that title on his chest with a uniform. Now, after years of being invisible, to hear it again even from a stranger made his eyes sting. He reached down, rubbing behind Buddy's ear. "Hear that, heroes? Bet you didn't see that one coming." Buddy gave a soft huff that almost sounded like a laugh. Later that evening, a volunteer drove them into town and dropped them at a small church shelter. It wasn't fancy, just a modest room with a clean bed, a window cracked open to the cool night air, and a bowl of fresh water for Buddy. To Frank, it felt like stepping into another world. He lifted Buddy gently onto the mattress, pulled the blanket over his side, and whispered, "Today you saved somebody, Buddy. You're a real hero." Buddy sighed, pressed his face into Frank's hand, and drifted into sleep, his chest rising steady, his tail twitching once, as if he was dreaming of victory. Frank sat by the window, listening to the faint hum of the city. For the first time in years, he didn't look out with bitterness or shame. He looked out with quiet wonder, and a smile tugged at his lips. "We're home now, Buddy," he whispered. Not a house, not riches, but something far greater. 3 days had passed since that night in the woods, and life inside the small church shelter had begun to feel almost unreal. The room was modest: one bed, a cracked window that let in the cool spring air, and a wooden chair tucked into the corner. But to Frank it felt like a palace compared to the tunnel. He spent his mornings boiling water in a dented pot and tearing bread into small pieces to share with Buddy. Sometimes he read old newspapers left behind on the bench outside, even if the news meant little to him. What mattered was the quiet. What mattered was that Buddy lay by his side, tail flicking in small, happy beats, eyes brighter than they'd been in months. Buddy was healing quicker than anyone expected. His leg was still wrapped in a cast, but he moved with growing confidence, even daring to hop toward the window when birds sang in the morning. Frank would chuckle and say, "Don't even think about it, pal. You're grounded till that cast comes off." Buddy would sigh dramatically, like a child told he couldn't go outside to play, and then plopped back down on the bed. It was on the third afternoon when the knock came. Frank frowned. He wasn't expecting anyone. He shuffled to the door, opened it slowly, and there they were, a man in his 40s, tall and sturdy, and beside him, a young girl with long brown hair and eyes wide with something Frank recognized: gratitude. It was Lily, the girl they had saved. She held a small bouquet of wildflowers tied together with a red string, and in her other hand a neatly folded handkerchief embroidered with her name. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but there was strength in it too. I came to thank you, and to thank your brave dog." For a moment, Frank couldn't find words. He stepped aside awkwardly, gesturing them in. Buddy lay curled on his blanket, head resting on his paws, half asleep. But the moment Lily entered, Buddy's eyes opened. No bark, no growl, just a calm, steady look. His ears twitched, and his tail gave the slightest thump. Lily knelt beside him, laying the flowers carefully by his head. "Thank you," she whispered, her hand trembling as it stroked his fur. Buddy leaned into the touch, closing his eyes like he'd been waiting for this gentle moment. Then he opened them again, wide and dark, shimmering with a softness that made the girl giggle through her tears. The man stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We told our neighbors what happened. Everyone knows now this dog is a hero. People are talking about how he saved Lily, how he and you risked everything. And we also heard—" He glanced at Frank. "We also heard he doesn't have a real home." Frank's chest tightened. He nodded once, slowly, unable to say more. The man continued, his voice steady. "We have a small farm outside of town. It's quiet, safe. My daughter loves this dog already. If Buddy is willing, we would be honored to give him a family, a real home. He'd have space to run, warm blankets, and more food than he'd know what to do with." Lily's face lit with hope. She stroked Buddy's tangled fur again, whispering promises as though Buddy could understand every word. "We'd take care of you. You'd sleep inside by the fire. You'd have toys, and I'd make sure you never go hungry again. You'd never be alone." Buddy tilted his head, ears pricked as if he were truly listening. His tail gave a small wag. He looked first at Lily, then slowly turned his gaze to Frank. And in that gaze, the room went silent. Frank felt his throat close. He bent down, resting a hand on Buddy's head, his voice trembling. "You hear that, kid? A real home, real people, real love. Everything you deserve. Everything I could never give you." His eyes glistened. He swallowed hard. "Go on, Buddy. This is your chance." Buddy blinked slowly, his eyes dark and deep, unreadable. He didn't move. Not yet. But Frank already felt the ache of goodbye building in his chest. The room was still. The bouquet of wildflowers lay bright against the dull gray blanket, the air thick with a silence that pressed on Frank's chest. Lily's hand lingered on Buddy's head, her voice gentle, coaxing. "Come on, boy. You don't have to sleep on cold ground anymore. You'll have a yard, chickens to chase, and a warm fire by the kitchen." Her words spilled out like promises she wanted to give immediately, and for a moment even Frank could picture it, a farm with a wooden porch, Buddy bounding across a green field, tail wagging freely. Buddy stood slowly, his injured leg wobbling but strong enough to bear him. He sniffed the flowers, then stepped toward Lily, her face lit with joy, her eyes wide, shining like the sun had finally broken through the storm. She opened her arms. "That's it, Buddy. Come here." He took one step, then another. Frank's heart clenched tighter with each paw that touched the floor. "Good boy," Lily whispered, her smile trembling with happiness. The man's hand rested on her shoulder, pride in his eyes. "Looks like he's ready," he said softly, as though sealing the decision. Frank pressed a hand over his face, trying to keep himself together. This was right, wasn't it? Buddy deserved warmth, food, safety, all the things Frank had failed to provide. He whispered under his breath, "Go on, kid. Don't look back. This is your chance." His chest burned as if the words themselves were knives. Buddy reached the space between them, right within Lily's reach. She stretched out her arms, her hands trembling with hope, and then he stopped. The room seemed to freeze. Buddy turned his head, his dark eyes locking on Frank's. The look wasn't sad, wasn't confused. It was steady, knowing, almost stubborn. Frank's lips parted, his voice breaking. "Buddy, don't do this. You don't owe me anything. Go." But even as he spoke, his heart whispered the opposite. Stay. Buddy made his choice. He turned away from Lily's outstretched arms and limped back across the room. His steps were uneven but determined, every limp like a declaration. He reached Frank, pressed his face hard into Frank's chest, and let out a deep sigh, the kind of sigh that belongs only to someone who has found exactly where they belong. Frank's arms wrapped around him, trembling. His tears spilled freely into Buddy's fur. "You stubborn little fool," he whispered, voice cracking. "But God help me, I couldn't let you go either." Lily's eyes glistened with tears. For a moment she looked as if her heart had been broken in two, but then her lips curved into a small, bittersweet smile. She wiped her cheeks and asked softly, "Can I still come visit him?" Frank looked up, his throat tight. "Anytime, sweetheart. Anytime. You're his hero too." Lily knelt again, hugging Buddy gently. Buddy stayed still, accepting her embrace, then licked her cheek tenderly as though giving her a farewell gift she could carry. She laughed through her tears, holding him one last time before standing. The man placed a hand on Frank's shoulder, giving it a firm squeeze. "He chose you. And that makes him special. Don't forget it." When they left, the room felt both emptier and fuller all at once. The flowers still lay on the blanket, their scent filling the air with something Frank hadn't felt in years belonging. That evening, the sunset spilled gold through the cracked window. Buddy lay with his head on Frank's knee, cast still around his leg, eyes half closed but peaceful. Frank poured warm water into 2 cups, one for himself, one for Buddy, though Buddy clearly preferred ice. He chuckled. "Still picky, huh? Guess heroes can be." His hand rested on Buddy's fur as he whispered, "We're still broke, still nobodies. But maybe this, right here, is home." Buddy sighed softly and pressed closer, drifting into sleep. And Frank sat in the dim light, his heart aching but full, knowing that sometimes home isn't walls or a roof, it's the bond that refuses to break. Spring rolled gently into the city, bringing with it softer winds and trees dressed in new green. The sky stretched higher, brighter, as if the world itself had opened its arms. Frank pulled his old knit cap over his head and slung the worn backpack across his shoulder. Inside were the only things he owned: a few cans of food, a dog-eared paperback with half its pages missing, and 2 rubber chew toys someone at the shelter had pressed into his hand for Buddy. Buddy trotted ahead, no longer wrapped in bandages. His back leg still carried a slight limp, the scar a silent reminder of battles fought and survived, but when children on the street saw him, they didn't notice the limp. They saw the wide grin, the wagging tail, the sparkle in his dark eyes. To them, he wasn't a scarred stray, he was joy on 4 legs. One afternoon, as Frank leaned against a lamppost, Buddy spun in circles for a crowd of laughing kids, shaking paws like a practiced clown. Their laughter echoed down the street, bright and pure. Parents smiled, strangers paused, and for those few minutes, even the city seemed to forget its noise. Frank folded his arms across his chest and chuckled softly. "Look at you, star of the show," he murmured. He said no more, but his eyes carried the weight of pride, relief, and something close to love. The next morning, they set off again. No map, no plan, just forward. Frank whistled, and Buddy leapt high into the air, paws slapping the pavement like a drummer marking the beat. 2 silhouettes moved side by side down a road that belonged to no one. To others they were invisible, but to each other they were everything. Nights were still hard. Sometimes they found a shelter bed, sometimes they curled beneath bridges, and sometimes they simply lay under the stars. Frank used to hate the silence of the night. It had always felt like punishment. But now, with Buddy's steady snore beside him, silence felt like comfort. He found himself watching the stars and whispering, "Not so bad, huh, kid?" Buddy would thump his tail once without even waking, as if to agree. They weren't rich, they weren't famous, they weren't even wanted in most places. Yet they carried something money couldn't buy. They carried each other, and that was enough. In a world where people measured worth in cars, houses, and bank accounts, there once lived an old man with no roof and a dog with no home. Together they proved that home isn't a place you find on a map, or four walls that shut out the cold. Home is someone who chooses to stay. And so they walked on, nameless to strangers, but to each other everything. Because sometimes the truest home you'll ever know is the one that walks beside you.